My name is Kathy Hepburn. I live in Carlsbad, California, and I contributed Milkweed Pods to the Into the Forest International Art Installation Project. My inspiration: as a child, I was always outside, roaming fields and forests, and it was the butterflies really that made me notice milkweed pods. I was fascinated by the plant's seasonal transformation from flower to pod to seed and to flight. When I decided to make the pods, I collected a seed pod that I found on an RV road trip for inspiration and used cardboard dies and hollow form technique to shape and bake 5 different pod shapes and 3 sizes. I created and baked 10 sets of makumegane pod shells using a stamp that looked like sticks to create a more natural looking surface. Some of my initial plant concepts were based, of course, on my inspiration, and I considered during the initial conceptual phases, including lining the pod, adding a spine in the center of the open pod, creating a stalk, mounting the pods with wire, clay, or both, and creating seeds using feathers or as plumes. So as I made progress, I tried going to scale to test my ideas. This is always a good idea. So after creating a pod set, including the lining and the spines, and making a few seeds with feathers, I covered a wooden dowel with clay and baked it to create the stalk, and then finally mounted the pods with wire. I contacted Laura Bachman for input and advice, and she said she liked where it was going, so I appreciated her input. But there were many adjustments to be made, many adjustments, including that the pods actually needed to point upward rather than downward, like the plant does in nature. I then created the stalks and used craft wood dowels covered with clay, stamped for texture, painted with acrylic paints to highlight the texture, and sealed with archival wax and then polished to create the stalks. Unfortunately, in the middle of the full assembly of the plants, I discovered that the first set of stalks, all 10, were too thin and vulnerable to breakage. So I had to create 10 new stalks with a heavier dowel. More on assembly later. Creating the seeds also presented some of its own challenges. The seed part was easy. I was using clay, of course, but the plume, that was the challenge. After trying to use small white feathers that filled my studio with floating fluff and not liking the look, I decided to think more out of the box. After online searches, a visit to a fly fishing store, considering using false eyelashes, and meandering through yarn and craft shops, I discovered the perfect material at Party City, a headband with fake hair attached. I cut sections of the hair, glued the ends, and then glued the middle, and then cut each section in half to create 2 plumes. So I moved forward into creating the seeds, all 90 of them, and I used the flower shaped cutter for consistency in size and shape and to cut the clay, and a knitting needle to create a small opening in which I inserted the glued end of the plume and baked it into the clay. The plumes got better as I improved my technique, which meant I was splaying the plume before baking rather than after. So some of the final touches on the pods included lining each pod with gold or silver textured clay, adding the spine, painting the edges with liquid silver or gold leaf, and deciding possible seed placements. I also involved drilling holes for beaded and twisted posable wire and adding the wire for attachment to the stalks. In building the plants, I went ahead and prepared all the pods, wired and ready to attach to the stalks. Of course, this was the second set with the larger wooden dowel. These were drilled in 5 places along the stalk, and holes were marked with bits of wire to identify the location of the hole, as they were hard to find otherwise due to the heavy texturing and coloring of the wooden dowel stalks. When it came to wrapping the wire to attach the pod to the stalk, I positioned the stalk on one side of the wire, and one side of the wire was passed through the hole in the stalk and then wrapped around the stalk. The other wire was wrapped in the same way, but in the opposite direction. The twisted stem of the wire allows for the pods to be posed with tip up and facing outward from the stalk. So now that all the pods were mounted and it was time to place the seeds. It might have been easier to place the seeds in the pods before they were on the stalk. That way the pods would be flat and seeds easy to glue, but I waited till last to make sure that no seeds were harmed in the making of these plants. I simply laid the plants on the table and rotated them to epoxy the seeds in place. There are extras to sprinkle on the ground and on the forest floor. So my project then was ready to go into the forest, and although I live in Carlsbad, California, I did spend my early adulthood, 20 years of it, living in Pittsburgh. I plan to attend the opening if possible, and I'm looking forward to the gallery show and my visit to my hometown and a walk through the forest. Thanks to the Into the Forest team for all the support and this brilliant idea to create a fun collaboration.